Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, for this particular series, we're drawing directly on the comprehensive research and the historical arc detailed in Glenn Purdy's book, The Timeline of Jamaica. It's an amazing resource. And that book maps the island's development, from its initial discovery right through to independence. That's the period we'll be focusing on today. But just so you know, for those following along, in our companion series, The Forgotten Chapters, we actually address the valuable material that didn't make it into the main book. That includes events both before and beyond independence. So this dual structure lets us explore pretty much every notable historical episode, whether it falls within or outside that core timeline from the book. So today we are opening the historical files, really digging into the arrival and settlement of Africans in Jamaica. And look, if you think the story is, just about colonial power and hardship, well, you're missing a huge part of it, maybe the most vital part. We are diving deep into a fiercely preserved legacy, resistance, military genius, and, well, technological innovation that might have actually changed global history.
Yeah.
And not in the way the history books usually tell it.
It really is a deep dive that it demands we look past the standard narrative. We have to recognize the absolute complexity of survival against, well, impossible odds.
Right.
Our goal here is to try and synthesize this history, the initial arrivals, the enduring struggle of the Maroons, and these staggering contributions that have remained, frankly, uncredited until very, very recently.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start then. The initial arrival point. It's surprisingly early. We're talking 1517 under Spanish control. And what's crucial here, as you hinted, is that those first Africans didn't arrive directly from the continent.
Precisely. No. They were either already enslaved on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, or they were descendants of people enslaved there.
Okay.
King Ferdinand authorized their import to Hispaniola back in 1501, but there was this condition.
A condition?
Yeah, a strict one. They had to have been born under the dominion of Spanish Christian subjects. It was a clear attempt, really, to control who was coming in, religiously, culturally.
Trying to prevent Moors or others the Spanish thought were, quote, doubtful of the faith.
Exactly. So that first wave was quite small and filtered, you could say.
But that whole system, that initial approach, it just gets completely dismantled in 1518. What happened then? What made that the real turning point?
That's the critical pivot point. King Charles I consented to this annual supply, 4,000 African slaves per year.
4,000 annually.
Annually. To enter the colonies, Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, directly from Africa.
Right.
And this shift, it signaled the beginning of the rapid industrial-scale transatlantic system, as we often think of it.
So the numbers in Jamaica started climbing quickly after that.
They did. They reached roughly 558 enslaved people by 1611. Seems small now, maybe, but the nature of the practice, the direct pipeline from Africa, had fundamentally changed forever.
And that early history, it really sets the stage for centuries of conflict, doesn't it? Which leads us directly to this powerful, enduring legacy of Jamaican resistance. The Maroons.
Yes, the Maroons. And the name itself, Maroon, gives us such insight into their strategy, their success.
Oh, like this.
Well, it seems to originate from an Arawak word, Simara, which incredibly means both arrow and rebel.
Arrow and rebel.
Yeah, and the Spanish adopted that as Cimarron, which came to mean fierce or unruly.
There's this analogy in the sources that's so powerful. It says the rebel blended into their surroundings just like an arrow camouflages into the mountain, ready to strike, unexpectedly. That really captures the Maroons' effectiveness, especially in those early centuries, fighting for self-emancipation.
Absolutely. The Maroons were enslaved people who fled, who escaped, specifically to create independent colonies.
And this wasn't just in Jamaica?
No, not unique to Jamaica. There were similar revolts and communities forming in Mexico, Hispaniola, Panama, even as early as 1530.
Okay.
But in Jamaica, they used that mountainous interior so effectively, they established what they call palinks.
Palinks, what exactly were they? Were they just hideouts?
Oh, much more than just hiding places. These palinks were complex operational mountain farms, really self-sustaining settlements they built after escaping the Spanish.
So like small, free communities.
Essentially, yes. Relatively free communities, crucial for food, shelter, and definitely serving as bases for military operations.
And that whole system of resistance, it became a real political force when the British showed up in 1655.
It did. The Maroons immediately sided with the Spanish resistance. They knew the island's interior like the back of their hand.
Right.
And they used that knowledge to keep the British bogged down for 5 years.
But then the politics get complicated.
Very complicated. There were 4 main Maroon camps around this time. But the one near Louis Vale, what's now Worthy Park Estate, that one was critical.
And that was led by?
Led by a man named Juan Lubolo. The English called him Juan de Bolis.
Okay.
And the British, realizing they couldn't win without controlling that interior, they persuaded de Bolis to switch sides.
That alliance with de Bolis, that was the strategic key, wasn't it?
It was the turning point. With his help, the British finally managed to push the last of the Spanish off Jamaica in 1660.
And de Bolis, he got rewarded.
He was. Freedom, land. But his defection, well, it came at a heavy cost.
How so?
He was later killed by rival Maroons. They saw him as a traitor.
Understandable.
And this didn't end the conflict, not at all. It just shifted it. For another 80 years, the fighting between the British and other Maroon groups continued, fueled constantly by more enslaved people escaping British plantations and joining the Maroon ranks.
It's such a living history. I mean, today you have communities like Moortown, a kampong,
Right.
occupied by the direct descendants of those fighters, living on treaty lands granted, quote, for themselves and posterity forever.
Exactly. It's an unbroken line.
So the Maroons carve out this fierce independence, but then when the British officially take over, the sheer scale of forced labor importation just explodes, and the demographics along with it. Between 1655 and 1809, Jamaica becomes the single largest importer of African slave labor in the Americas.
Let's talk about that scale because it is, well, it's staggering. An estimated 1 million Africans transported during that period.
1 million?
1 million. Now, about 200,000 were then re-exported, sold on elsewhere, but Jamaica remained the central hub.
The main marketplace.
Absolutely. Especially when the Royal African Company got the monopoly in 1672. Jamaica became one of the world's busiest and most brutal slave markets.
And the immediate result of that flood of people was this terrifying demographic imbalance.
Terrifying is the right word. Enslaved Africans quickly outnumbered Europeans 5-1.
5-1 right away.
And it got worse. By 1763, the ratio had swelled to 30 black people for every 1 white person.
30-1, just let that sink in.
That 30-1 ratio, that's the essential context for understanding all colonial policy and the constant state of panic.
And didn't you mention something about planters not even living there?
Yes, compounding that vulnerability was the fact that only about a third of Jamaican planters actually resided on the island. Compare that to Barbados, a smaller place where maybe 2/3 were resident.
So even fewer white people actually present day to day.
Exactly. And that instability, that fear, led directly to these infamous deficiency laws.
Okay, the deficiency laws, what were they trying to do?
Well, they were designed explicitly to force plantations to maintain a minimum number of white people, theoretically, to keep control over the overwhelmingly large enslaved population.
What was the rule?
The 1703 statute, for example, required 1 white person for every 10 slaves, up to the first 20 slaves. Then 1 additional white person for every 20 slaves after that.
Okay, can we break that down? Like if you had 50 enslaved people?
Right. So for 50 slaves, you'd need 1 white person for the first 10, another for the second 10. That's 2 white staff for the first 20 slaves.
Got it.
Then for the remaining 30 slaves, you'd need 1 for each 20, or part thereof, so you'd need 2 more, making a total of 4 white people required for 50 slaves under that 1703 law.
Okay, 4 people. But the sources are pretty clear these laws just didn't work as intended. They failed.
Utterly failed. Because planters quickly figured out it was cheaper to just pay the fines for noncompliance.
Cheaper to pay the fine than hire the staff.
Yes. Than to actually hire and maintain the required number of white employees. And this is a critical insight, I think. The law essentially became a tax.
A tax mechanism.
Exactly. The fines collected under the deficiency law started showing up prominently in the government's projected revenue. They were counting on planters not complying.
Wow. So if they found it cheaper to pay the fine than to theoretically protect themselves by hiring more overseers or staff, what does that say about the priorities?
It says the colonial structure prioritized revenue, even over the supposed security concerns. The Crown was willing to tolerate this huge instability, this massive risk, because the money from the fines was so significant.
Is there data on that?
Yeah, we see it quantified.
Yeah.
In 1780, just the parish of Westmoreland collected over 1,700 pounds in deficiency tax. Which translated to an actual non-compliant ratio on the ground of about 1 white person to 33 slaves.
Yeah.
Not the 1-10 or 1-20 the law demanded.
So the economic incentive just completely overrode the supposed security goal.
Completely. And if we look beyond the island itself, the data from the transatlantic journey, the Middle Passage, it paints an equally devastating picture.
The journey itself.
Yeah, of the roughly 1.2 million people who embarked for Jamaica between 1655 and 1809.
How many survived?
Well, the overall mortality rate was around 16%. 16% died en route.
16%. That's almost 1 in 6 people perished just on the voyage.
Yes. When you grasp that number, you start to understand the sheer scale of human loss before anyone even set foot on the island. It's horrific.
But those who did survive, they brought with them this incredibly rich cultural foundation.
Absolutely invaluable. And the origin data tells us where that foundation primarily came from.
Where were most people from?
The 3 highest regions were the Bight of Biafra, that's about 30%, then the Gold Coast, modern Ghana area, about 29%, and West Central Africa, like Congo and Angola, around 18%.
And that specific link to those specific regions is why cultural memory and genius persisted despite everything.
Exactly. It's how practices like African Day names survived.
Right. Edward Long mentioned this. He was, as we'll discuss, a very flawed source. But he noted this custom back in 1774.
He did. It was this preserved naming convention based on the day of the week someone was born. A really crucial act of, well, self-naming cultural retention in the face of erasure.
We still know some examples, right? Monday names like Cudjoe for a boy, Juba for a girl.
Yes. And Friday names like Cuffy and Fibba. Those are the classic examples long recorded.
And it wasn't just names. Traditions were preserved through belief systems, too.
Definitely. Obeya, for instance. It became this vital, internalized practice, more than just religious rites. It was a whole system of belief, woven from whispers, rituals, warnings.
Operating in that space between, as one source put it, fear and faith.
Yeah. It provided psychological sustenance, cultural defiance against the Christianity imposed by the masters. It helped maintain social bonds, provided spiritual power, and often political power, too.
That focus on survival, on retaining culture and knowledge, it leads us to maybe the most astonishing part of this deep dive. The intellectual brilliance that survived and maybe fundamentally contributed to global innovation. We have to talk about the 76 black metallurgists.
Yes, this is a stunning piece of history, really brought back into focus by Dr. Jenny Bulstrode's recent study from 2023.
What did she find?
That in the late 1700s, near Morant Bay in Jamaica, there was an ironworks operating. And it was primarily staffed by 76 highly skilled black metallurgists, many of them born in West Africa.
A region with a long, deep history of advanced ironworking itself.
Exactly. And their skill level wasn't basic. This was industrial scale. They developed a specific method for refining scrap iron and pig iron into high-quality wrought iron.
Okay. And the implication?
The staggering implication, based on Dr. Bulstrode's research, is that their technique, drawing on these African traditions, might have actually predated the court process in England.
Wait, the court process, patented by Henry Court in 1783-84, the process widely credited with making mass production of wrought iron possible.
The very same. The process seen as essential to fueling the British Industrial Revolution.
So you're saying the foundational technology of the industrial age might have been developed in Jamaica by enslaved Africans, not in England.
That's the immense historical question this research raises. Was it born in Jamaica?
Is there proof of their expertise beyond the existence of the ironworks?
There is, and it's in the records themselves. The white owner of the foundry, a man named John Reeder, he reportedly admitted, essentially, that he was, quote, quite ignorant of such a business.
He admitted he didn't know how it worked.
Yes, and he described the black ironworkers men with names like Devonshire, Mingo, Cuffy as being, quote, perfect in every branch of the iron manufacturing.
Perfect in every branch. That's an incredible admission.
It's a staggering admission of skill, of independent intellectual brilliance under the most brutal conditions imaginable. It points to a legacy of global impact that's been hidden, basically, in the archives.
Okay, before we kind of pull all this together, we need that critical thinking moment about the sources.
Right.
Especially someone like Edward Long, whose history of Jamaica from 1774 gives us so much detail.
Yes. Long's book is used constantly to understand the era, but we absolutely must read it through a lens of profound bias.
Why? Who was he?
Long was a slave owner himself. He profited directly from forced labor. His family had been deeply involved in the Jamaican plantocracy and the slave trade since the 1660s.
Okay. So his perspective is inherently compromised.
Deeply compromised. While he documented things like the day names, maybe because he found them curious, his book is fundamentally a polemic. It's an argument for continuing slavery.
And his views on black people.
He explicitly believed black people were an inferior race. That belief permeates everything he wrote. So when we use his documentation, we have to remember he's observing and describing the very people he actively argued should remain enslaved.
We're essentially having to reverse engineer history from the biased accounts of the oppressor.
Precisely. It's a constant challenge with this kind of historical work.
So let's synthesize then. We put the fierce resistance of the Maroons, the endurance against impossible odds, and this powerful, uncredited genius together. What does this history tell us about Jamaica?
It tells us the history of Africans in Jamaica is this profound dual narrative. It's not just one thing.
Okay.
On one hand, you have the incredible military and political success of the Maroons, forging independent communities through sheer will and generations of fighting.
Resistance.
And on the other hand, you have this deep intellectual contribution, a genius that didn't just allow survival, but actually contributed fundamentally to global economic and technological progress.
A contribution that was then stolen or misattributed.
Exactly. They weren't merely laborers in the field. They were, in some cases, inventors shaping the modern world.
And that invention, especially the metallurgical one, that's the provocative thought we want to leave you, listener, with today. If a pillar of the British Industrial Revolution, the court process, might actually be wrongly credited, if it might have been born from the technological mastery of enslaved people in Jamaica, then what other critical innovations lie hidden? What other vital contributions, maybe in agriculture, medicine, engineering, are still buried or misattributed in the shadows of this history, just waiting for someone to rediscover them?
That's the question.
That is definitely something for you to mull over.